All right, we're live. Welcome to Dive into World Building. Getting a little bit of a late start today, but that's okay because we have bells on and we're talking about garbage today. Because we haven't talked about garbage yet. How could we not have talked about garbage yet? Well, anyway, so garbage. It's an important topic because if you haven't figured out where all the garbage is going to go in your world, you really, really should. Otherwise, you're going to have a real mess on your hands. And also, you should be thinking about what kinds of things people throw away and what kinds of things they don't throw away. Yeah. So there's a lot here. So what people throw away depends on what they're using, what's available, how they're able to use different parts of what they're using, whether packaging is a thing. All sorts of different factors are contributing to that. You have things like midden heaps that tend to consist mostly of the inedible portions of the creatures that are being eaten, like, say, shells or bones that can't be used for tools, that kind of thing. And also pieces of shards of broken pottery. That was a contribution kindly made to my wall by Brian Dalton, who is not making it today. So fortunately, we have Brian Buell, the other member of the League of Extraordinary Brians, who is representing today. So
we have a law of conservation of Brians.
There we go.
If there's too many, then it upsets the balance. If there's too few, well, then it's just,
and there's just
lacking.
It's sad.
Okay, so yeah. I thought he made a good point about the fact that packaging is actually a pretty recent thing.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, we can go into packaging as a recent thing, but I mean, even now, there's biodegradable packaging being used all over the place.
Yeah.
Like leaves. And then there's also multi-purpose packaging, reusable boxes, tins, furoshiki, those lovely big Japanese squares that everybody was bananas over a while back. But packaging doesn't have to be disposable. That's a thing we've been taught by mass manufacturing culture.
Right. That's right. And I think, in fact, that the idea of disposable packaging is a relatively recent idea. Not always.
Yeah,
certainly,
I'm trying to think about the earliest examples of disposable packaging that I can think of. And some of that had to do with people wanting to put advertising on things. It's when you have branding that disposable packaging becomes more appealing to the purveyor.
Yeah.
So in an era where you just get the soap from the store and it doesn't really matter, then you get a block of soap and you take it home somehow. When it matters that it's Ivory soap, patent number, blah, blah, blah. Now it's got a paper wrapper around it with the name.
Yep.
So it's really interesting to me because Japanese packaging is notoriously really, really abundant, but this is also the culture with the notoriously really, really picky recycling stream. There's
okay.
It's infamous, and it's been infamous for decades that Japanese recycling requires you to be really, really precise about what you're recycling. And there are these infamous sort of think pieces and essays about, I had to throw this thing away and I had to think really hard about what it was and I had to separate this component from that component because I had a leather top to my shoe that had to be recycled on a certain day of the week in the leather recycling bin, and it can actually be the basis of like sitcoms and comedy routines.
And
they're I'm trying to remember how many. There was some picture going around for a while about some community that had like 28 recycling categories or something like that.
Wow.
Well, the more you separate out the things that you're recycling, the easier it is to recycle it, unless you have some kind of mechanism by which you separate them, which is
Yeah.
where in science fiction it becomes very tempting to have intelligent recycling, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
This is when Neil Stephenson was writing his nanotechnology world in the Diamond Age. Things could take things apart and use their molecular components, and then recycling becomes less of
Oh, yeah.
a
Interesting.
difficult task.
Isn't that sort of the basis, like the transporter technology too, where they were like, oh, we're just gonna like break down these atoms and rearrange them and make it into like clothes and food and stuff.
No, it's the replicators.
The replicators, that's it. Yeah,
Right.
thank
Yeah.
you.
Well, I mean I actually do have a lot of thoughts on that in my current giant work in progress, because I do have a thing that I'm calling them matter boxes, but they're effectively 3D molecular printers, right? And in a culture that has that kind of printing, what does that mean about trash, and what do you feed into that printer? And I mean, on Star Trek, they don't talk about how these things work, right? They just materialize out of thin air. It's a
They
magic
don't, though.
trick.
They do talk sometimes about picking up raw materials for the replicators, but I think it's just a matter of sort of like the, yeah, I think it's, you know, like they pick up atoms as opposed to picking up like,
Right.
I think
But,
it sometimes
you know,
depends on who's writing
plant
that episode
material.
too. I'm not sure if there's necessarily consistent about how they
I
deal with
don't
garbage.
remember a canonical answer. I'm sure there may be one. We're just all showing the fact that we're all fake Trek fans now. Hello.
Yeah.
But you know what? Yeah. How do you throw it away?
Yeah.
Do you separate it out? Does it go in an incinerator? Does it go into a slurry? Do you separate it out so that it's conceptually not the thing anymore? In the same way that, you know, we can use compost, but we have to turn it into this inoffensive matter, as opposed to their cultures that just spread manure. So
Yeah.
there are these ritual ways of handling trash,
Mm-hmm.
which in
Well, I
my
was
story
trying to
leads
think
to
about.
how do you handle death?
I was trying to think about what, like, okay, if you have to go get some sorts of inputs, but if you are doing this at a molecular level, why would you? Because there's nothing that you're losing. There's nothing that's going away. You can't make carbon into anything smaller.
Mm.
Right.
So even if you have, you know, if every communicator has 3.8 grams of coltan, even when you throw it in the recycling stream, it will still be there. And so you don't even have to look for like rare trace minerals or any of that, because you can just make it. So unless there's a way to make it unusable, that's almost a zero waste, zero input system. What is that? There's another word for that, and I can't think of it right now.
Yeah.
But this is that moment again where it's like, you know, we have a lot of really good SF and a lot of really good world building, but sometimes they just don't take that extra step and go, okay, but what does that actually mean?
Sure.
So, I mean, the thing I was looking at was, as the end user of the recycling process, do you care? Because right now we care very much.
Yeah.
Most of us. We have a bunch of squeamishness going on. If you have grown up with this, things can be made out of component parts, do you just think of everything as component parts? Because the processes right now are different, right? The thing
Yeah.
that makes a manure and the things that makes something else, you know, factory manufactured things, feels very different.
Yeah.
Does it? And also in that culture, and we've kind of gone far afield, I have an exploration of, do we care whether it was made the old-fashioned way, botanically or biologically, as opposed to being made by manufacture?
Mm.
Right now we still do. Will we still in the future? Which I think is related to the whole, what is garbage?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, and in fact, the way that garbage is processed and where it's put and how it's sorted is different depending on the region, even within the same country. I mean, certainly in the United States, it varies a lot.
Yeah.
So, one of the ways that spaceships traditionally can handle things is by jettisoning, which creates space debris. But the other is that using the extreme cold of space can let you have cryo storage of otherwise noxious ingredients and matter. I'm particularly mindful of this right now because the weather has become very hot and humid here where I am, and trash cans are now much less pleasant than they are in the winter.
Yeah, for sure.
So getting things into the trash is easier than when it's covered in inches and inches of frozen, slushy, heavy snow. But right now, the fact that the trash can lid is light is not much of a consolation when it's it's not a pleasant thing.
Yeah. Yes, so I have 3 plastic bins outside my house, and one of them is small-ish and black, and that one is for things that can neither be recycled nor composted. And one of them is large and blue, and that one is for recycling. But we're not asked to do a lot of sorting or processing of our recycling, so I'm not sure how effective it is. I'm really hoping that there's some kind of sorting process going on later down the line, but it's really hard to tell. And then the last one is the green bin, which of course is for yard waste and food waste and that sort of thing. But putting meat waste in there is totally fine. So,
and that completely varies by municipality right now in the U.S.
Yeah, it does actually. So, you know.
It's become a ritual as my friends are traveling to ask the host, hey, which one does this go in?
Yeah.
And I'm also remembering the galvanized trash cans of my childhood.
Yeah.
They seem very old and long ago and far away now.
Yeah.
I haven't seen one in years.
Well, you know, when I was living in Tokyo, we were expected just to put the trash out in like plastic grocery bags. And so this is something that if you're trying to depict a particular region of the world in your world building, then it's really good to know what form the trash pickup takes and how it works, because yeah, so that was 1990s Tokyo. I'm not sure what, if anything, has changed at this point.
Well, and there's a big urban-rural split there too, because I think if you go out to urban areas, you're going to find things like galvanized trash cans and burn barrels. And the further you get into the urban space, the less likely that is to exist.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely a difference between. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, Brian, please go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, yeah, I mean, the way garbage is handled is going to, you know, the difference you're going to find between urban and rural areas is going to be, you know, vastly different. Like in rural areas, you're going to find, you know, more compost opportunities, I think. I mean, around here, there are more bins being put out, like in restaurants and what specifically that are labeled for compost, but I'm not sure how universal that is. Certainly, I think California is a little bit ahead on environmental awareness.
I mean, our garbage service actually allows us to pick up some compost. I think it's like once or twice a year if we want to. And I'm assuming it's the compost that they make with all the green garbage, right? But I don't usually take advantage of that, you know, and we live in the suburban sort of, you know, area. So it's not like we have a lot of farming to do, but it can still be helpful to have.
Yeah, where I'm located, the regular garbage is picked up every week, but every other week it alternates between the recycle bin and the green waste. But otherwise, every week it's 2 bins going out, and it just depending on which week it is which bin is picked up.
So targeting your area and learning about the details of how garbage is processed could be useful.
It really can be. I remember when we would truck our horses into Golden Gate Park, when we came back out to load them, and there's an amount of ordure in the bottom of the trailer, people would line their trunks of their cars in bags and then shovel horse poop into their car to take it home for their garden.
Wow.
It was great. We had free trailer cleaning. It was awesome.
Everybody's happy.
I remember there was something called Zoo Doo, where it was exotic animal poop from zoos that you could buy for your garden as well.
Wow.
Because you're kind of like, well, what? There's so many things that have to deal with so much.
It's interesting because I think there's a market for that particular type of waste, and I think the urban equivalent would probably be like e-waste, where it's kind of hard to get rid of, but there's people that will pay to come and take your e-waste because they're going to use it to for the material.
Yeah.
I'm still taking notes on that last little redolent detail.
Well, there's also the issue of when does a thing become garbage, or when is it repairable?
Yes.
Yeah, and to whom?
And what does that stream look like? For instance, in Sydney, there's a very great tradition of putting your things out on the laneway for other people to take.
Uh-huh.
And my friend who was a emigre from the U.S. to Australia surmised that this is because when you have a country where so much is imported, it's much more difficult to just callously say, oh, well, this needs to go into the landfill.
Yeah.
Somebody else might want to fix this, even though it's not worth it to me to fix it. And whereas we have laws in many, many communities in the U.S. about whether or not you can throw things out and when, and having to have permits to do that, and having to call to make arrangements, and to, you're not allowed to just leave it there. It's considered littering. And the difference between
you just
littering and
reminded me
trash
that
disposal.
graduation is this weekend, and so now would be the time to drive around the U and pick up furniture and other stuff that I may not have.
that actually, because people are starting to do that.
Well, there's a lot more free cycling. Is that what that's called? Free cycling?
Free cycling? Yes.
Yeah, free cycling. There's a lot more of that now than I recall there being when I was younger.
Yeah, there are actual websites that you can go to and just say, here are the things that I am putting out on my porch. Come get it.
Yeah, buy nothing.
There's also been some interesting stuff about the come get it off my porch. I have black friends who refuse to do porch retrievals without having a white friend in the field.
Yep. That's the thing.
So who is allowed to retrieve things? Also, really, we have been very trained in the West to think of things as disposable and instantly turning them into trash.
Yeah.
And throwing them out easily. I found that when I lived on a boat, I had to think much, much harder about my trash situation.
Yeah.
Because I had to dinghy every piece of trash off my boat.
Yeah.
Makes it much harder to deal with.
Yeah, I think the first time you ever get to pack in, pack out, leave nothing but footprints, you get a much better idea of exactly how much trash you generate on a regular basis.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm sorry. lack of sleep and post WisCon haziness.
I hear you. I'm so there.
I'm also thinking about that whole culture of things like kintsugi and turning what might be trash into treasure, turning it into art, and the ways that we do this to either make it invisible or to make a huge amount of celebration of the fact that it's been transformed. So the difference between stitching the hole closed and embroidering it closed.
Oh yeah.
And we don't necessarily see a lot of that in science fiction. And in fact, it's one of the things that sort of visually classifies the difference between a hero and a villain in many stories.
Huh.
The hero's things are cobbled together. Or sorry, the villain's things are cobbled together. The hero's things are sort of squeaky and new.
Really?
Except in the framing where the villain is very corporate and sleek and the hero is sort of grassroots and scrappy.
Okay.
So there are little bits of visual coding depending upon the world building of that particular story on is recycling a virtue or a suspect act.
Well, there certainly was this case of this guy who had figured out a great way to recycle e-waste, and he ended up getting like jailed.
Oh, that was the because his startup discs were he thought that they belonged to the hardware, and the companies dissented and said that it belonged to the company and that they weren't consenting to having it sent back around. Yes.
So
right, garbage versus intellectual property also becomes a thing.
I think sorry.
Oh, I was just thinking also whether or not you're allowed to repair it.
Yeah.
Things rendered into garbage because you can no longer get the spare parts.
Hi, iPhone.
It's planned obsolescence. I put that in the chat, but I know a bunch of you are on phones.
Yeah.
Yeah, planned obsolescence is there to force you to buy the new thing that comes out and to keep buying the new thing. And I think all that stuff started in like the 40s and the 50s, where like once upon a time you could get like some tinker would come to the neighborhood and fix the holes in your pot, or there was a store you could, there was somewhere you could take your pot to go get it patched up. And now your pot with a hole in it has to be chucked out and you have to buy another one because nobody, like some of it's lost art. Some of it is just sort of fashion. It's like it's gone away and we forgot we ever did it in the first place. Some of it is the corporate planned obsolescence to keep forcing you to buy new things all the time. And so like there's an actual cobbler in Salem. And
there's still few around.
I could go get my shoes, but my shoes are fine right now. But
what's interesting is there also is a trend towards having repair cafes.
Yes.
Those are relatively new as I understand it. And basically it's that we are trending back towards repairing things rather than just tossing them.
And that's what's behind the rise of tool lending libraries as well.
Uh-huh.
What were you going to say, Che?
I forgot.
Sorry.
That's okay. Probably wasn't that interesting.
So there was something that that I wanted to touch on, and that is the question of how we fold ideas of morality into our treatment of waste. And Morgan hinted at something. So Morgan was not able to make it today, but she sent me a lengthy message. And let me see if I can find it. She said, if recycling comes up, I hope someone mentions that it can be labor intensive and that a moral insistence on repurposing and recycling can be somewhat ableist. Now, I'm not sure exactly what she meant by that. And I don't And I don't have her here, obviously, to expound on it. But
one of the things I would think is that if it's a job that requires you, standing and taking stuff apart all day,
yeah,
you're going to need 2 hands. Maybe you can do it with 1 hand, but if you're not fast enough, they're going to fire you.
Yeah.
Things like that.
But I think there's positions where you can drive the truck and have the automated controls that can pick up things. They
do have those full trucks now.
Right. So,
yeah.
I mean, I don't know that you necessarily have to be fully able-bodied in order to work in that industry at this point.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's what she's getting at. And I just wanted to kind of put the thought out there because it's kind of up to us to see what we need to explore. I mean, there is a lot of garbage processing technology at this point.
Right.
Yeah. Without that technology, though, like you have in Victorian times where people did it, you had little kids were mudlarks along the Thames, and they would just go and pick up whatever they could, whatever was there, clean it up a little and sell it to the rag and bone man, which was like the next to lowest on the social hierarchy. And like the rag and bone man literally went around picking up rags and bones, and the bones would go to like glue manufactory.
Yeah.
So that's a word.
Yeah.
And then the rags, I'm not 100%. I forgot what they did with it. I watched the whole documentary on it.
Make rags into paper.
Yeah,
and a lot of the bone actually went into bone china, which is where we started with this. You were saying that it's bones and broken pottery. Well, bone china is actually like 20 to 40% actual bone.
Wow.
Yeah, there was a how it's made thing, and I was like, oh my god, that's disgusting.
Mind blown.
Yeah, and the thing was, the people who had the very least resources had to deal with these bones because they didn't tend to be fresh. They were already starting to rot and be gross, and so you had to go and clean that up and get it ready for the next step in the manufacturing process. So, again, it was this really high-class thing that rested on the very lowest people, and they got the very least remuneration for the hardest work, which seems to be the way capitalism works.
Well, I mean, just looking at our language, how many insults are centered around garbage, and referring to people as garbage. I mean, I think we have curse words that are basically garbage.
Yep, good point, Brian.
And yet on Facebook, if you call men trash, you get suspended.
I remember touching on before, like I think we talked about like caste systems or something, but it's often like the sort of the lowest of society that ends up dealing with the garbage, either through a formal caste system or just extreme poverty.
Sure. That's definitely the case with my caste system that I work in.
Yeah, so it's like, are they considered untouchables because they process garbage? Are they valued because they process garbage? That's like nobody's ever valued for processing garbage. It would be interesting if like that were a sort of exalted position. There's a couple of young adult books I can recommend. There's one called City of Ember. Oh my god, look it up.
City of Ember, the one where they're under the ground and
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and that one, there was a lot of focus on garbage and recycling and having to remake and constantly reuse because they had such limited resources and they were completely cut off from the surface.
Yeah.
And then the second one, I put them in the chat, is it's kind of a mediocre book, but it was it's sort of post-apocalyptic, but it's sort of a utopia where nobody owns anything really. And every year, everybody destroys everything they own in a bonfire. But one of the things they had that was leftover technology was these battery trees. And they were actually trees that grew batteries. And you fed them with whatever garbage you couldn't destroy or reuse or get rid of otherwise. And so you would feed this to the trees would break them down and then grow batteries that you could pick and use. So that was kind of an interesting solution to garbage. And it was also a society that patched things and used things, and then just everybody gave everything to everyone else. It was an entirely, I think the author said it was a gift-based society based on a nonfiction book he read, which I can dig up the name of, but you may not want it. Anyway,
well, we've talked a lot about that's the first time I think we've really touched on a sort of fantastical treatment of garbage.
Yeah.
Definitely into the realism side of the garbage discussion up to this point.
Well, there's always the Star Wars garbage compactor. Get in there, I don't care what you smell.
Yeah, I have the feeling that they subscribed to the just jettison it into space.
Yeah.
Because it was a trash compactor. So they obviously, they generated a lot of trash on the Death Star. And so I'm guessing they just kind of shot it into space. Or, if they were passing a sun, maybe they just blew it all, let the sun burn it up.
Well, I mean, you can go right on up to The Force Awakens, where Rey is essentially living on a planet that's being used as a garbage can for ships.
Yeah.
And she's picking through the garbage essentially to find things of usefulness.
Yeah, that's a good example. Yep. It's not clear how the ships got there, but you would kind of assume that there was a battle nearby and they were within the gravity well, and they just somehow came down.
Yeah, I mean, given what was there and covered by sand, there obviously had been a civilization that was a lot more advanced then.
Yeah.
And now they're living in the ends of it.
Yeah.
It's kind of really post-apocalyptic now that I think about it.
Yeah. That was Jakku, right?
Yeah, it was Jakku.
And that may be true of Hoth, but how would you know?
Right, because it's all under the snow somewhere.
Well, that's something that came up during one of my panels, is that people were saying, well, how come we don't know about the previous societies and what they did with their stuff? And I'm like, because it's underwater, because the water's been rising for 10,000 years.
Yeah.
And so one of the ways that we learn about the past is by finding midden heaps. That's a big, huge deal.
Yes.
But when we can't find it because it's already submerged, then we're left without all of that information. And something to think about is that if we ever manage to do 100% recycling, what are tomorrow's archaeologists going to find?
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Well, we live in the world of the internet now, where nothing is forgotten. So
yeah,
maybe
but we're talking
archaeologists
about
will have an easier
longer
time.
periods of time than that.
Yeah.
Right, and you also look at the Gateway example, where yes, they may have had all of these recording devices, but you don't have readers anymore, and you don't know how to get that information back out. If you've ever looked at the 3 1/4-inch floppy disks from 1989 and gone, right.
Yeah, I don't have anything that'll do this anymore.
No.
Somebody snoring in the background?
I know. Is that like a dog or something?
Either that or Darth Vader has logged on.
I'm sorry.
That's absolutely it.
I am
Let's hear what
confessing
Darth
I thought I
thinks
had it
about
on mute, and
garbage.
apparently I
On the Death Star.
I sorry. It's Concrad. Sorry to subject everybody to it.
Don't worry about it. Yep. Oh, I was trying to write down that note about 100% recycling. Oh, and I wanted to mention, do any of you have thoughts about trash in N.K. Jemisin's trilogy, the 5th season and the Broken Earth series? Do we have a thought about that?
I haven't read it.
Well, I've read part of it, but I'm like, well, so one of the things that I guess made it feel like I should bring it up was this question of how you retain knowledge when disasters are happening. And so in some sense, one of the questions that can come up is what is garbage and what is actually potentially useful information. Right? And so, for example, and this is a little tangential, but if you think about it, what we used to do when we were doing archaeology and stuff was we used to dig out the bones, right? And we would look at the bones, but we weren't able to find anything out about what was around them because it had all decomposed. At this point, they're actually starting to be able to learn things from the dirt that surrounds the bones. And so, in fact, rather than just scooping all that away and tossing it out as though it had no value, we are more interested in sort of preserving it, at least for so long as it takes to learn, what this person ate before they died, which is something that you can find out by analyzing dirt. Right. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, and sometimes it's not as hard.
Yes.
Sometimes it's not as hard as that. Like the skeleton they found at Pompeii the other day that is running away and has a big, huge chunk of rock where its head should be.
Yeah. That was a pretty shocking photo. I was like, oh, ow.
Yeah. Talk about a bad day for that guy.
Yeah, that was the article title, right? Somebody had a bad day 2,000 years ago.
Yes.
Yeah. So I want to just do a slight tangent here of what happens in a zero waste society. Archaeology becomes suddenly a very different task.
Yeah.
Downstream of that, you now no longer have the midden heap to explore.
Yep.
I find it interesting that, once again, going back to trash becomes a very different thing depending on where you are. If you're living in a dusty environment, but there's actually dirt outside your door, you just sweep it outside and you have a constant battle about how much of it is inside on your floor and how much of it is outside. But in other contexts, it just has to be thrown away in with the vegetable peelings, because there is no outside to send it to, and it's not soil, it's bits of urban grit.
Oh yeah.
And sort of the whole issue of dust bunnies versus urban grit versus tracked in soil. Also, we have things right now where we do not have a requirement to make a thing disposable properly. So what do you do with a broken X is a persistent problem in our society.
Yeah.
E-waste is just the most notable, but what if it's not E? What if it's just, what do you do with broken clothing?
Yep.
And right now, in places that have abundant trash disposal, throw it in along with other things and render it further disgusting. This whole disposable society notion. In other cultures, it's possible that they become components, or that we go back to cultures of rag rugs and other things as opposed to buying our rags. I noticed it a lot when I moved where I am, because I came with 3 suitcases and no household goods, and I realized to my horror one day that I had no absorbent materials that I felt like I wanted to mop a mess on my floor with, because I had a bunch of shiny new dish towels.
Okay.
And I don't know about everybody else, but normally I'd grown up with, once the dish towels get to a certain level of grottiness, they no longer go back in the linen closet. They go under the sink or someplace else in a designated place for the rags.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Melissa will cut a corner
So-
off of a towel once it reaches the point where it's not going to go with the other towels.
I frequently cut up unsalvageable T-shirts into rags.
Yep.
I did that with I did that with my kids' underwear. So I'm like, it's soft. It would, buff things up really well.
Old cloth diapers are also really good dust.
Those are really good.
They are.
Yeah.
They've been washed so many times.
So
But we
yeah.
go on.
Oh, I was just going to say that I'm sorry I'm late, but I have lots of things to mention.
Sure. Let's mention a few of them since we're getting towards the end here.
So one of my favorite works of literature that has garbage as a kind of a world building is Michael Moorcock's Revenge of the Rose, which is an Elric book, one of the later ones that he wrote. Sort of after he'd completed the saga, he wrote some more, and then some more. And they're bouncing through different parallel worlds, or through different dimensions, different realms, planes of existence. And so they get to a new world, and they kind of look around. And there's this hill, and they climb to the top of the hill, and they see that the hill is this big, long thing. And then there's a valley, and then there's a big, long hill, and it kind of goes from horizon to horizon. And it's the first hint that there's something very strange about this world. And then they realize that the two hills are made up of huge, gigantic stacks of garbage that have been built up over centuries, if not millennia. And then they're like, why are there two parallel things of garbage here, so a mile or so apart, whatever. And then the first of what they call the gypsy cities arrives, which is these giant cities on wheels. And they're going all the way around the world on this particular planet in a circle, like on the equator or whatever. They have a land route, and they just keep circling the planet and throwing their garbage to the side. And they've been doing it so long that it's now a geological feature. But it was the first hint of the strangeness of that place was the garbage. So I thought it was a really interesting choice. Kim Stanley Robinson, who wrote Aurora, which is a generation ship novel, certainly has pointed out the difficulty of creating a viable generation ship, because you have to recycle everything, like every single little thing, and have to account for every little crazy little thing, which we take for granted. Even the what were they, the biodomes or whatever? They turned out to be like. Like they were practically ordering pizza. It was such a permeable boundary, so we haven't run that experiment as humans. The ISS gets stuff from Earth all the time, and so if you're world building, if you're writing a generation ship or a starship-based society or whatever, you really have to account for like crazy levels of recycling.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, what Star Trek was sidestepping by creating replicators, is because you could put everything in. And what happened in Aurora is the balance of the ecosystem fell apart because there were things that there were inputs that they needed that they couldn't get because they didn't have molecular rearrangement.
Exactly.
And so everything started to break down and fall apart. And that's absolutely what's going to happen if you can't do it, if you can't recycle at a molecular level.
Right. So it's a world building consideration if you're writing that kind of story.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then people were wanting to talk about, I see it in the sidebar, WALL-E, which is, of course, the whole MacGuffin of that movie is garbage, right? Dealing with garbage and what it means to avoid the problem and what it means to not avoid the problem or to face it head on, and what kind of people avoid the problem and face it head on. So, that one had that issue without having any of the, they had generation ships, right? But they weren't worried about the other thing that Kim Stanley Robinson was worried about. They were worried about the garbage on Earth. But So.
Well, that ship, I don't think was a generation ship. In fact, it wasn't meant to be one.
No, you're right. It's just a short period of time, but it wound up being.
And then it ended up being a very long period of time, and so that was one of the causes of the chaos that was that was coming about on that ship.
Which is even worse, right? You don't even plan for a generation ship, and yet you make one. So I think they may have had replicator-like technology, though, to watch that. But if I remember the picture of all the various ship captains on the wall, and there were like 20 of them, you know. So they've been at it for a while out in space, and the robots were on Earth. So those are all really, and you see the beginning of that movie, which is like completely unlike a children's movie. It's like 40 minutes of no dialogue, where it's just like Wall-E with the trash, right? And then the egg-shaped robot and whatever. But it's, you know,
now,
the world building is all about the trash.
They did have on the ship. There were like Wall-E meets like his giant cousins. There was like a ship's hold with other trash, far larger models.
Yeah, with huge like scoops and things.
And they did blow their trash out into space.
Yeah.
You did have to kind of wonder where they were getting all their stuff.
Yeah, there was a lovely detail in a C.S. Friedman novel, The Madness. And the MacGuffin of the Madness season is insect-like extraterrestrials conquer the Earth, and then they go from planet to planet, and humanity are their slaves on their ships, and along with other species that they've conquered. And their ships are around like basically hollowed out asteroid kinds of things. And what they do is, because they don't think like people and they don't really have our sense of aesthetics, they just throw their garbage on the surface. And it's low gravity, but it just lands on the surface and hangs out on the surface of their ships forever. They don't care. Right? And I just love that moment because it was both world building, because our character had to like flee on the surface, I think, at one point, whatever. But it was a way that C.S. Friedman had of showing the alienness of people, that they didn't think like him.
That's cool. Thank you for mentioning it. Well, we got a little bit of a late start, but I think we covered a lot of things. And I think they were all definitely things that I would recommend that people think through when they're world building. So I think we did a good job with this one, even though we only did it for about 45 minutes. Anyway, thank you all for being here. Thank you so much for handling the schedule change. Yeah, I was at a little award ceremony at my son's school yesterday because he did well in French this year. So yay! and so next week, gosh, we're starting into June. But next week is going to be back on the Tuesday regular time, and I am not sure what we are going to talk about, but I will see what I can come up with in the meantime.
And whatever it is.
Sorry?
It will be brilliant, whatever it is.
Well, you know, it will be brilliant because you guys always say such cool things about everything. I mean, I really value the people who come and talk with me here. You guys have lots of collective reading experience and collective life experience, and you are really part of what makes the show as interesting as it is. So I appreciate you. We will have an interesting topic next week somehow. I will figure it out. And I am trying to arrange for Rebecca Roanhorse to join us as our guest author next month. So working on that. It's just a matter of finding a good date for her. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to stop the broadcast.
Thank you.